Hi all, good evening and welcome. I am Dhawan from the Corporate Communication team, and on behalf of CareEdge, I welcome you to our today's discussion on After Pandemic Gain, Pharma Feels Some Pain. We sincerely appreciate your time in joining us for this webinar. We welcome our esteemed guest speakers for today, Ravi Kumar, ED and CFO at Laurus Labs Limited, Ashutosh Dhawan, Group CFO at Mankind Pharma Limited. This session will be moderated by Pulkit Agarwal, Director and Rating Head, CareEdge. We will commence the session with a presentation by D. Naveen Kumar and Krunal Modi, Associate Directors at CareEdge. This will be followed by a panel discussion. We will be having a Q&A session with the audience at the end of the discussion. In case of queries, you are requested to key in your questions panel. Now, may I invite D. Naveen Kumar and Krunal Modi to make their presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Meg. Good evening to all of you, and I'll take you through the presentation. And here, for the first slide, we thought of discussing and presenting what are the key messages of this presentation. So some of the key messages are that the Indian pharma market size stands at about $46 to $47 billion in FY22, with formulation and bulk drugs contributing about 65 to 35%. And profitability margins are expected to remain under pressure in the near term. And the next is the tightening of the compliances by regulatory authorities. Then China continues to remain dominant in imports of pharma bulk drugs. Next is the revenue growth for exports and domestic to continue at a CAGR of about 79% over next 3 years. Next is we see that now the sector has been seeing that there's a higher R&D spend to move up in the value chain and to build the product pipeline. And last one is the credit profile of the pharma players is expected to remain strong due to their strong balance sheets. So the following is the flow of the presentation, where we can see that the overall overview of the Indian pharma industry. Then we'll be covering about the factors impacting the operating margins of the industry. Then comes the regulatory risk, then dependency on China, a major threat, and growth drivers for the both domestic and pharma exports. And last one, we'll conclude with the industry aggregates, where we'll present about the entire space of the Indian pharma companies, the listed entities, how the credit metrics are being observed along with the rating trends. So we'll now focus upon the Indian pharma industry, where we see that with the market size of about $46 to $47 billion in FY22, the Indian pharmaceutical industry globally ranks third in terms of volume and 13 in terms of value. The industry has exhibited compounded annual growth rate of about 8 to 9% in the last 5 years, that is from FY17 to FY22, while registering year-on-year growth of about 5 to 7% in FY22, which is largely driven by the higher domestic consumption, even as the exports value was stable at about $24.60 billion in FY22. So the main reasons for the muted exports performance during FY22 is on account of higher demand for COVID products. While it was a higher demand for the COVID products during FY21, and with absence of the COVID drug spy during FY22, combined with increasing pricing pressures in the US market, has overall affected the export growth. Now, coming to the structure of the Indian pharma, it is broadly divided into formulations and APIs, which contribute about 65 and 35% respectively. There are other segments too, such as the CRAMS and biosimilars, but their contribution to the overall industry is less than 5 to 7%. Further, for the formulations, about 50 to 55% of the revenue comes from the exports, and remaining comes from the domestic consumption. And whereas for the APIs, about 35% comes from the domestic market, and remaining is 35% comes from the export market, and about 65% is the domestic consumption. Now, in this slide, we shall discuss about the factors that are impacting the operating margins. Primarily, we see that the industry is witnessing multiple challenges, such as rising prices of active pharmaceutical ingredients. There's a rise in the KSMs, that is key starting materials. There's a surge in solvent prices, rise in freight and energy costs, and continued pricing pressure in the US generic market. Further, due to supply chain disruptions and prevailing lockdown in China, the prices of some of the APAs and KSMs have increased between 25 to 120%. while prices of excipients have risen between 15 to 200% during last 12 to 18 months. Apart from the cost of raw material, the cost of packaging material also saw an upward movement of about 25 to 100%. The cost of power fuel and coal witnessed a rise of more than 50% during last 1 year, while cost of freight saw a jump of more than 2 times. Thus, due to the aforementioned factors, CareEdge has observed that the profitability margins of the industry are tapering since Q1 FY22, and the same is expected to continue up till Q3 FY23. So in this slide, we shall be discussing the trend of the operating margin of both formulations and API companies. So there are 2 charts here. The left-hand side chart represents the trend of operating margins of all the listed formulation companies, while on the right-hand side, the chart represents about the trend of the total sales and the raw material cost, how much it contributed of the total all the bulk drug companies which are listed. In both the charts, a common phenomena that can be observed is that with rise in the raw material prices, the profitability margins have been tapering in tandem. Although there are other factors that are impacting profitability margins, which we have discussed in earlier slide, but the major factor that is impacting in raw material cost was a contribution of about raw material cost, which is contributing about 34 to 36% of the total sales for the formulations and about 44 to 46% of the total sales for bulk drugs. In chart with respect to formulations, we can see that the average raw material cost during FY17 and FY22 has remained about 33% of the total sales, but the same has increased to 34% during FY22. And it is expected to reach to about 36% during the current financial, that is FY23. Similar trend is seen in the API companies also. Now we shall look at the trends of all the companies put together. That is, there are total 54 formulation companies and 112 bulk drug companies which are listed. We'll see the combined trend in one chart. How does it looks like? So this chart actually represent about the entire pharma space which are in listed entities. Here we can observe more lucidly how the industry has started facing headwinds from H1 FY22 onwards, whose impact was seen during H2 FY22 and H1 FY23. That is current, what is half year we can see. This trend is attributed to the rise in the raw material costs, pricing pressure in the US markets, and logistics-related issues. Now, one more phenomenon which is there is that the CareEdge expects rupee depreciation to have a positive impact to nearly about 100 to 150 BPS on the PBLTD margins, that is EBITDA margins during FY23. On a full year basis, CareEdge expects the PBLT margin to shrink by about 200 to 250 BPS during FY23 over FY22, after considering the positive impact of the rupee depreciation. Despite expected moderation in the operating profitability in near to medium term, the credit profile of the pharma companies is expected to remain strong due to their low reliance on the external debt, and also the balance sheets of these pharma companies are on the stronger side. So one of the very critical factor which has to be observed is the regulatory risk. So here, with increasing the presence in the developed markets like US, the regulatory risk remains a very critical factor to be monitored. So actually, from the time COVID situation has accentuated, the number of inspections made by US FDA outside the US has reduced significantly. So that's what we can see in the table which is in the. But the thing is that with the COVID situation subsiding to great extent and the markets opening up, the inspections have also started to picking up the pace. So in the past, India has faced regulatory challenges by US FDA. However, with the experience, Indian companies have strengthened the compliance aspects. US FDA classified all the audit observations in also 3 categories. That is, no action indicated, voluntary action indicated, and official action indicated. So despite rise in number of US FDA audits, the instances of adverse observations, that is, which is falling under voluntary action indicated by US FDA, has come down since 2018. Further, out of the total warning letters, the number of warning letters received by relatively large companies, when I say relatively large companies, means these companies which are having a turnover of more than 1,000 crores, has substantially come down. That is, from 10 in 2019, it has come down to 2 in 2020. So as the number of inspections carried out by the US FDA was fewer during calendar 21 and also during the last 6 months of the current calendar year, so the data actually which is presented will not give the full picture. So however, what we see is that with easing of the travel restrictions by US FDA, has again ramped up its inspection rates for the manufacturing facilities in the pharma industry. During the past 6 months, it is observed that many Indian pharma companies have received Form 483 observations on their manufacturing facilities. Rising instances of audit observations by US FDA impacts the compliance cost and in turn hurts the profitability margins. Now, any observations from the regulatory authorities can also lead to a delay in launching of the new products and may even impact the current revenue stream, thus denting the prospects at least in the medium term. So the ability of the Indian pharma companies to successfully sail through the inspections carried out by the regulatory authorities would be critical in determining their future growth plans and profitability margins. But one important thing what we observed in the pharma companies is that the large companies actually are hedging themselves by the site transfer wherever the regulatory issues are present, and by filing the ANDA from the two sites instead of one site, which can mitigate the regulatory risk to some extent. Now we'll see one of the main thing, which is that dependency on China, which is a concern and major threat for the other pharma companies. So the biggest challenge for the Indian pharma industry is its dependency on the imports, particularly from China, for the bulk of intermediates. So during the outbreak of COVID-19 in China, Indian pharma companies have faced a lot of supply disruption in terms of the procuring raw materials. Even prior to COVID-19, during FY18 and FY19 also, the industry has experienced a similar kind of situation, but not because of COVID, but because of some other issues such as stringent compliance in terms of the pollution control norms adopted by the Chinese government. So during this period, the Indian pharma industry witnessed a sharp rise in the raw material costs. Since then, Indian pharma industry has realized the importance of backward integration for long-term and sustainable growth. So the country's total blood drug imports during FY22 has increased significantly by about 24%, that is from $3.8 billion in FY21 to $4.73 billion in FY22. And because the industry has been continuously facing either supply disruptions or spiraling of the price of the key starting materials, come intermediates, along with the ongoing tension across the borders, so therefore it places the industry in the vulnerable state. So in order to safeguard the national security, now let us see that what steps the industry is taking and what steps the government is taking in order to support the industry. We'll discuss in the next slide. So these are some of the strategies that are adopted by the Indian pharma companies to reduce the dependency on China for the procurement of raw material. First and foremost thing what we see is that majority of the pharma companies have done is that they've gone for the backward integration, at least for some of the critical KSMs. And they also started increasing their spend on R&D in order to produce cost and process efficient raw materials. Further, several global and domestic companies have sought for China plus one supplier base in order to have diversified supplier base. This to some extent has also proved advantageous for the Indian pharma API companies, as certain pie of the global orders were shifted from China to India. As a part of industry efforts, even Government of India has recognized the need to support the industry to reduce the import dependency and has thus introduced several schemes and policies such as PLI and setting up of large API and bulk parks, the pharma parks, in order to support this industry, where they provide the common effluent treatment and all these things, facilities have been provided. So recently, government has provided budget allocation of about 15,000 crores under the PLI scheme. Now we shall see the Indian export growth, which is primarily led by the US market. So the chart on the top represents the trend in the exports in the past 11 years. So that is from FY11 to FY22, where we see that the exports have grown by about 7 to 7.5% CAGR. Indian pharma exports are majorly driven by exports from the US market, which accounts for about 30 to 35% of the total exports. So more than 40% of the generic formulations being sold in the US market are manufactured in India. So as for India, US plays a critical role, even for the US, India plays a critical role. Further, increasing customer diversification from China with respect to bulk drug has led to increased demand for APIs from India. As depicted in the chart below on the right-hand side, at below bottom end, the exports of the APIs, which remained between $3.6 to $3.9 billion from 16 to 20, but the same has increased significantly to $4.4 billion in FY21. However, the growth in the bulk drugs for FY22 has remained moderate at about 1% only due to rise in the domestic requirement actually. Similarly, the exports from the formulation segment has also remained muted due to the intense pricing pressure from the US market, which we have discussed in the earlier slides. And also one more reason is the deferment of orders by the global players due to adequate inventory stock availability with them. Now, let us try to understand how the export industry is expected to grow going forward and what factors would aid for its growth in the next slide. So in this slide, we can see that the exports of the pharmaceutical products are expected to rise gradually. So CareEdge expects that the India's pharma exports to grow at around 6.6% in the next 3 years, that is till FY25. And the major contribution is expected from the generic formulations only. Indian pharma companies are one of the price-effective producers of generic formulations. Changing world demography along with the complex and specialty generic and biosimilar products are expected to drive the export growth for the Indian pharma companies. The growth also would be supported by the patent expiry in the regulated markets, which my friend Krunal will be discussing in detail in the subsequent slides. So with this, we thought that we will discuss now again how is the pattern of the consumption in the domestic market. So in the domestic market, what we'll see is that the consumption has grown at a CAGR of about 6% during past 5 years. And it has reached about $23 billion in FY22. Now it is expected to grow at a pace of about 7% during the next 3 years till FY25. And the main reasons for the growth of about 7% is because of the growing healthcare awareness, penetration of health insurance, growing lifestyle diseases, and increasing government expenditure, especially on the schemes such as Ayushman Bharat and all. And especially post-COVID, what we have seen is that the demand for the preventive drugs like vitamins and minerals, they are growing at a faster pace in the industry. And primarily what we have seen is that especially after the COVID, the lot of healthcare awareness has increased and people's interest towards, taking the health insurance policies and their awareness towards, various other health aspects has improved significantly. So in the light of all these things, we expect that the domestic market to grow at a CAGR of about 7% for the next 3 years. Now, in order to understand what are the geographies which actually contributes majority to our export market, and why export market I was speaking is because about 50 to 55% of the India's total market size has been contributed by the exports. So this part will be explained by my colleague, Mr. Krunal. So I would like to hand over the presentation to Krunal. Krunal, please.
So thank you so much, Naveen. Good afternoon to all. My name is Krunal Modi, and I'll take you to the balance part of the presentation. So my colleague Naveen has covered the various exports growth drivers, and now we will see the region-wise exports opportunity. So we will start with the present exports market for India, which we have classified into the two parts. One is the developed market or a regulated market, and the second one is the emerging market or a semi-regulated markets. So major developed market includes the US, Europe, Australia, Canada, etc., while emerging market includes the countries from Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc. As we saw previously, Indian pharma exports stood at around 24 billion in 2022, of which formulation exports were about $19 billion. And balance was bulk drug exports. So within the formulation exports, the exports to developed and emerging markets stood almost equal to around $9.5 to 9.7 billion in financial year 2022. So moreover, as visible from the first pie chart on the left-hand side, the US market contributes majorly with about 66% share in the total exports to developed market, followed by Europe. As depicted in the second pie chart on the right-hand side, within the emerging market, Africa region contributes nearly 40%, followed by Asia and Latin America. While the share of the developed market was about 45% in bulk drug exports, as depicted in the third pie chart in the bottom of the slide. Next slide. So here we have presented the growth rates of formulation exports and bulk drug exports. The chart on the left-hand side indicates the growth of formulation exports, which has been divided into developed market and emerging markets. During financial year 21, we saw a significant growth in exports, both for developed markets and emerging markets, which was largely due to panic buying seen during the pandemic by most of the nations. While growth rates tapered in financial year 2022, with exports to developed markets saw a negative growth. Higher base of last year and price erosion in developed market, especially in US, were the major reason for the negative growth for the developed market. Exports to developed markets saw negative growth in financial year 22, while the exports to emerging market registered a healthy growth of around 8%. We expect formulation export growth for developed market to remain negative in financial year 23, with continued pricing pressure in the US market, while growth of emerging market to sustain at around 8% in the financial year 23. Going forward, we expect faster formulation export growth for emerging market compared to the growth rates of developed markets. Chart on the right hand side indicates the export growth rate for bulk drug. So similar to formulation export growth rate, the export growth rate for bulk drug also seen a decline in the financial year 22 due to high base effect. We expect growth rate of bulk drug exports to improve to around 6% in the financial year 23 and around 8% in the financial year 24 and 25, which is expected to supported by capacity expansion under PLI scheme of Government of India, apart from benefit of China Plus One strategy adopted by global companies. So by financial year 2025, Indian pharma exports to reach to around $30 to 31 billion, of which exports to emerging market should contribute higher share in overall pharma exports. So next slide. Now we'll discuss the patent expiries. So patent expiry allows the generic drugs to penetrate in market. Over next 5 to 6 years till 2026, the patented product worth $224 billion goes off patent. So post the expiry, the price of this patented product is expected to fall nearly 90 to 95%. However, despite this expected price erosion, it provides a very large opportunity to Indian generic formulation companies. Many of the Indian pharma companies are already working to develop the generic version of this patented product to seize the upcoming opportunity. It is expected that Indian pharma companies may get around $4 to 5 billion opportunity due to this patent expiry within next 3 to 4 years. So how the Indian pharma can grab this opportunity? Let's discuss this in our next slide. So as you can see from relative cost comparison, the table on the left-hand side below the chart, India has a significant cost advantage in production, R&D and clinical trial cost over developed market. The cost of production in India is almost 50% cheaper than the developed market, and so as the other cost. These factors gives India an advantage over the developed countries. Apart from this, availability of a trained and specialized pharma workforce helps India to grow in a global market. With upcoming opportunity in developed market, generic formulation companies in India have been investing in their capabilities to develop complex and specialty drugs. And as you can see that R&D expense of top 10 Indian pharma companies remain in the range of 6 to 8% of their net sales during past 5 years. And it is expected that it would remain at around 7.5 to 8% higher than the historical average over next 2 to 3 years, as these companies are working with a strong product pipeline. Majority of this existing product pipeline are targeted towards the US market, given the patent opportunity there. It is also to be noted that of the total ANDA approvals granted by the US FDA, India commands major share in product approvals. So we will see the trends of ANDA approval in our next slides. Here we can see the Indian pharma companies' dominance in the ANDA approvals. India's share of ANDA approval in total ANDA approval has remained at around 35 to 40% during the past 8 to 9 years. During calendar year 2020, calendar year 2021, and the current calendar year 2022, in terms of absolute number, the product approvals have remained lower than the historical average due to limited facility inspection by US FDA in light of travel restriction. However, India has the distinction of having the largest number of US FDA compliant pharma plant outside the US. With the available US FDA compliant infrastructure, it is expected that India will lead the patent cliff opportunity in US. Next slide. So considering the competitive environment, the Indian pharma companies venturing up in the value chain from commodity type Me Too product to innovative R&D product including biosimilar, complex generics, injectable, vaccine, new drug delivery systems, NCE, to sustain growth. Moving up in value chain provides sustainable revenue visibility and profitability to Indian pharma industry. As you move up in the value chain, there are limited number of players operating and thereby provides profitable growth. However, as you move up in value chain, it would require strong R&D capabilities and resources to fund such R&D. These drugs have better realization, which can reduce the gap between India's ranking in volume and value. This can be achieved by addressing the right categories, dosage forms, and picking up the right market across the world. As we saw earlier, the Indian pharma are preparing to spend more R&D to build strong A&D and product pipeline for sustained growth. Now let's see the industry aggregate or pharma industry's financial performance. So over the last 5 years ended financial year 2022, the operating profitability of our industry remained in the range of 23 to 26%, where FY21 profitability margin was exceptionally high due to the COVID-led opportunities, along with the sharp reduction in marketing and traveling cost on the backdrop of COVID-19 related restrictions. The operating profitability margins have already normalized in the financial year 22 with resumption of travel and marketing cost. However, as we discussed earlier, with current input cost pressure, apart from the continued pricing pressure in the developed market, it is expected that operating profitability margin to decline by around 200 to 250 basis points in the financial year 2023 over normalized base of 2022. Despite expected moderation in operating profitability, the credit profile of the pharma company is expected to remain strong due to their low reliance on their external debt. So as shown in the chart on the bottom of the slide, the debt coverage indicators have remained strong and it is expected to remain strong. Care Ratings believes that Indian pharma companies to sustain its credit profile in future. Next. Care Ratings has a over 100 plus portfolio of pharma companies. And we can see from the left side chart that about 80% of the portfolio companies are in investment grade. That is with the rating of BBB and above. And due to the improvement in the credit profile of these companies over 5-6 years, we can see that the modified credit ratio, which is basically a number of reaffirmation plus upgrade to number of reaffirmation plus downgrade, have remained above unity almost over 5 to 6 years ended 2022. So now let me summarize the presentation in a few major points. So as we saw, the Indian pharma companies are expected to deliver a strong growth due to the upcoming patent expirations, penetration of health insurance, growing chronic diseases, and moving up in the value chain like biosimilars and injectables or complex and specialty drugs. Further, the support from the government in terms of PLI schemes, backward integration by pharma entities, and China Plus One strategy for supplier diversification shall also provide healthy prospect to the sector. So Care Ratings believes that Indian pharma shall continue to benefit in long term despite near-term challenges. So here we now will have concluded the presentation and we shall now take the inputs from our guest.
Thank you, Dean Naveen, Kumar and Krunal Modi. Now may I invite Pulkit Agarwal to take over the session. Pulkit Agarwal is the Director and Rating Head at CareEdge. He has been associated with CareEdge for 16 years now. His expertise spreads across risk management, credit analysis, credit and credit risk. His remarkable education background consists of being a CA and holding a PGDBM from IMI New Delhi.
Thank you, Meg. Good afternoon, all. Now it's time to seek opinion from the experts in the field. Before we start our panel discussion, let me introduce our esteemed guest panel members for today. Our first panel member is Mr. Ravi Kumar. Mr. Ravi Kumar is Executive Director and CFO, Laurus Labs Limited. Mr. Kumar is associated with Laurus Labs since 2006. He holds master's degree in commerce from Andhra University and is a fellow member of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He possesses nearly 3 decades of experience in finance, IT, HR, and supply chain. Prior to Laurus, Mr. Kumar served as Vice President at Matrix Lab Limited. A very warm welcome, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you.
A second panel member for today is Mr. Ashutosh Dhawan. Mr. Dhawan is a Group CFO, Mankind Pharma Limited. Mr. Dhawan is a chartered accountant and holds MBA degree from Delhi University. Mr. Dhawan has over 25 years of experience in strategic and operational finance in functional leadership roles with reputed organizations. Prior to Mankind, he has worked with DLF, Oriflame, HCL Tech, and ST Micro. Very warm welcome, Mr. Dhawan.
Thank you.
Let me start today's discussion with Mr. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, Indian pharma companies import around 60 to 70% of their bulk drug requirements. In spite of discussions happening on making in India Atmanirbhar in APIs, we have not seen any decline in imports so far. So in your sense, what are the challenges that are being faced by Indian bulk drug and API companies in becoming globally competitive?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. The base challenges is actually we have to import the basic materials, basic chemicals from in China only. We don't have that capability to make in India. And second, your point of despite of repeated conversation of make in India, it takes time. It is not that if you decided today to start an API or a formulation for that matter, it takes time. So even for an API setup, if it is a greenfield, it takes 18 months to 24 months to activate. Of course, if you want to stop one product to the other product, probably switch over of the product may take in a little shorter time. But the current challenge is there is a pricing pressure. We are all talking about a pricing pressure in the US, but also there is a pricing pressure in India, even for the bulk drugs and APIs. Second is some of the solvent prices have gone up. And of course, now they are softening off late, especially last 1-2 months, it is getting softening. And second is some of the input costs have gone up even in India. Now, for example, coal prices have gone up and thereby steam prices. And then second is some of the logistics cost increased. There is no normalization of a logistics cost when compared to the pre-COVID level to the today. So again, sailing time has increased. Thereby, you have to have your more working capital. These are the challenges for the bulk drug and API companies. And as you said, when we will be reducing imports of bulk drug from China, but ultimately, the only price is only the determining factor. So unless we could able to compete with China price, no Indian player can give you a premium. They may give a premium of maybe 1% or 2% or 3%, not beyond that. So I think unless we are competitive, we can't replace China.
Okay, got it, sir. Coming to Mr. Dhawan. Mr. Dhawan, post-pandemic, how do you see the demand for acute and chronic drugs? And in your view, which are the therapies which are growing faster than the industry average?
Sure. Thanks. Very good afternoon, and thanks, Care, for bringing us together and for a good session. Okay, so if we talk about post-pandemic scenario, there has been few trends which have come up post-pandemic. One is, as you rightly mentioned in the presentation, that because of increased awareness, there is a shift from the curative medication to the preventive medication. So this shift has driven higher growth of nutraceutical products. And if we look at the nutritional segment, so this can be classified into two broad buckets. One is focusing on the overall health, and second one is supporting every other therapy area, say cardiac, ophthalmic, hair, etc. And if we draw comparison between these two segments, so overall health segment has performed better as compared to therapy-based nutritional products. And then secondly, there is a normalization phase, which is there. The market is normalizing. And as far as the therapeutic categories are concerned, in pandemic, there were certain segments, especially the chronic segment and also acute segment like antifungal, etc., which underperformed. So now we are witnessing a recovery in these two traditional growth segments. And moreover, there has been increase in the patient footfall in the hospitals, which has increased. And that has also increased the demand for hospital-based products or the critical care products. In addition to these two trends, one of the another trend which we have witnessed after the pandemic or during pandemic phase has been the increasing adoption of modern trade, e-commerce, or the organized retail by the consumers. And I don't see that these new growth trends which have come up, like preventive medication or adoption of modern trade, e-commerce, that's going to go away post-pandemic scenario. So these are some of the trends what we have seen post-pandemic. Yeah.
Okay, understood, sir. Post-pandemic, there have been talks of de-risking and diversifying the supply base. So would like to understand from Mr. Kumar, what kind of opportunity lies ahead for Indian pharma companies, given the expectation of diversification of supplier base by global pharma companies?
Yeah, I think there is a good opportunity, even if you think not only in the big pharma, even if you think on the Indian companies are also trying to replace China or add another source apart from China. That's what everyone is doing it. So they can able to de-risk. If they can't do it, have an inventory of 6 months or 9 months or 12 months hold inventory for the de-risking it. So it is a China plus one strategy. It is very visible for the Indian pharma. But the only question is whether China will be completely eliminated. Definitely not. But everyone is looking, apart from China, there need to be another source outside China. But obviously, India is more geared up to take that position than any other country in the world as of today. So Europe has its own challenges. US has its own challenges. So I think India has a very good opportunity, and Big Pharma is really looking forward to India to source more. And then the only question is, who are going to be taken major share out of the China plus one strategy? Of course, all the companies having an opportunity to take it based upon their based upon their capacities and the surplus capacities, or how quickly they can build new capacities. For example, we build new capacities even in 9 months' time. So when the need comes, in fact, of course, in the best of the best cases, actually we build in 6 months, but you can't expect every time to build in 6 months. At least if it is a brownfield expansion, 9 to 12 months you can expand. But it is a good opportunities for that. I hope India will take advantage of this particular situation.
Okay, nice perspective, sir. Coming back to Mr. Dhawan, Mr. Dhawan, in FY22, we have seen margins of pharma companies impacted due to elevated raw material prices, packaging costs, higher freight rates, and supply chain disruptions. So would like to understand from you, what are the measures that have been adopted by the Indian pharma companies to offset these cost pressures?
No, certainly there has been an input cost pressure that is definitely there, especially with the disruption in the global supply chain due to Russia-Ukraine situation or China-related lockdown, etc. So a lot of actions which have been taken to basically de-risking the supply chain. So first is the sustainability is important. So So to ensure sustainability, there has been increasing inventory, and so which has and getting into long-term contracts. So that also has a cost impact. So there has been impact on profitability. There has been impact on cash flows, etc. And the one of the various measures which have been considered is that the restructuring or the cost optimization exercises which has been taken in terms of more innovative packaging that has been there. There has been increased automation and various business excellence practices focusing on the yield improvement and monitoring the cost very, very effectively. And the good part has been that the government has also recognized the impact of inflation, which has been there. And for example, in the recent annual increase in the national list of essential medicine this year, the government has allowed a 10% increase for the companies, historically, which has been linked to the WPI, etc. So both the top line, the bottom line, and wherever the opportunities are there, optimizing on those opportunities and keeping a close eye on the cost. So these are some of the measures which the companies have adopted to offset the increase in the raw material cost or the freight expense, which has almost doubled, which you have highlighted. And the commodity prices have also hardened. And so wherever the cost efficiencies which can be achieved, so all those parameters have been adopted quite aggressively over the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months. And then there has been some automatic saving which has come because of COVID, but that's not sustainable. And so these are some of the broad, high-level steps which the companies have taken to offset the cost pressures.
Got it. So, Mr. Dhawan, continuing with the same question on cost pressures, do we see any signs of relief in raw material prices, especially when we are seeing intermittent lockdowns in China due to their zero COVID policy? So, are there any visible signs of reduction in raw material prices?
See, the situation is definitely dynamic in China. China as a supplier has not fully stabilized it yet. And because we still hear these COVID responses in China, where there are lockdowns. But having said that, there has been easing out on the freight cost as compared to the last year. Even now also the barrel price has come to $85, which has been the lowest in the last few months if we compare a few quarters. But the commodity prices continue to remain harder due to, especially in the packaging part. And maybe with the situation stabilizing, Russia-Ukraine situation, so there will be some easing out or softening of these commodities prices. But if we draw a comparison last year to this year, there has been softening in some of the cost prices, especially on the commodities front.
Got it, sir. Got it. Coming to Mr. Kumar, Mr. Kumar, government announced a PLI scheme in pharma to strengthen domestic manufacturing capability, primarily in APIs, KSM, and complex generic drugs. So, what are your views on the PLI scheme, and is this enough to mitigate the risk of import dependency?
Actually, what we have to do is any incentive should be a little bonus. That is not the basis for the investment. So the PLI scheme, there are some conditions like you have to complete it is a product specific number one. Number two, you have to complete the new project within the time. The incentive is based on certain conditions. But basically, I feel you need to have an infrastructure. I think after a long time, Government of India has cleared 2 bulk drug parks, one in Andhra and another in Himachal Pradesh. That's what I understand from the media. So I think these two, I think one more they have to announce. Once this infrastructure, if they start, but I know it takes about few years time for this infrastructure to be in the operational. Like only thing is all this infrastructure, they should have some kind of an common facilities to gain the costs. Like for example, steam and power, they may set up as a cogen plant, and they may set up a common effluent treatment plant, and then they set up water distribution. So for example, they can go then the whatever be the output coming out of that can be used in it may not be used in the process, but it can be used in the utilities. But as a common effluent or common area, it can sell that water to the various places at a concessional price. So I think that will come in handy. We should expect that these parks should be operational at the earliest. But of course, any incentive is a good to boost. But we have to see how much of an investment and then how many products have been indigenized under PLI scheme and what kind of I think time only has to tell that answer.
Right, sir, got it.
Certainly. Just to complement and supplement what Mr. Kumar has said, that PLI scheme is definitely going to give a boost because the thought process is very clear. If you see pharma, there are three broad buckets. One is the generic, and the branded generic, and then comes the patent of orphan drugs and the patented drugs of the new chemical entities and all. So if you see the structure, the companies typically they have to invest 6 to 9% of their revenue in the capex, either as a maintenance or a growth capex. So through PLI scheme, government has incentivized, at least the structure is that your growth capex has been incentivized by the government directionally, so that the companies are, instead of getting into run-of-the-mill Me Too products, they are focusing more on the higher value chain. So that's one will definitely bring India in the upper circle from in the value chain, because if you see in the global supply chain, even though India is the largest supplier in the US market and all, but in terms of the size and scale, that is missing. The number one in India, if you compare it to the number one global pharma company, the difference would be minimum 15 times or so. We are talking 5 billion to 75, 80 billion. So definitely PLI scheme is going to going to give impetus to the future upward value chain progression in the times to come. But yes, the future is future, so we have to wait and see how successful it's going to be. But it's a right step in the right direction, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks. Right. Mr. Dhawan, as per your view, what would be the volume growth for domestic pharma companies in FY23, and what could be the sustainable volume growth in medium to long term for domestic companies, pharma companies?
Okay, thanks. Okay, so sustainability. So if we talk about growth, Indian pharma market has been a growth market. Okay, so we have to look at it from two prisms. One is the macroeconomic factors from the sustainability point of view. So the macroeconomic factors, they are intact because it's a large population. Population is increasing, and the growth rate of population is lower than the GDP growth rate. So which means that there is a rising income standards, and those rising income standards, they lead to incidents related to lifestyle related diseases. So they are showing an increasing trend. So, and moreover, as you have rightly pointed out in your presentation, that there has been more insurance adoption on a year-on-year basis. To sum it up, there is an underlying demand scenario in India which is expected to remain healthy in the times to continue. Okay, and with regard to, if we look at the component-wise growth, so there are three broad components. One is the volume growth, second is the price-related increase, and third is the new launches, which also result in the growth, getting into a new segments and all that. So if we see out of these three broad components, volume growth constitutes somewhere around 60 to 65% of the total growth. And the balance is split between the price as well as the new launches. But if we talk about this year growth rate for the pharma industry is expected to be lower than the last year, because last year pharma demand was exceptionally high due to Delta variant, and the COVID cases were exceptionally high in the Q1. So it's a base effect. So if we compare from the last year to this year, as you rightly pointed out, the growth is expected to be somewhere in the single digit. But if we exclude COVID products, I feel the sector should be able to grow at a historical level of 10% odd level in the next few years. So these are some of the points which I wanted to highlight from the immediate as well as the long-term sustainable growth standpoint.
Got it, Mr. Mr. Kumar, I wanted to understand from you regarding the pricing pressure which Indian pharma companies has been seeing in US. So, what is your view on that, and by when you expect the prices to stabilize there?
It's a very, very, very challenging question. So no one knows the answer. So I think one day it has to be ended. So that we have to wait and hopeful for the day. So I think the challenge what is happening is everyone wants to retain their volume. That's bringing or that is an extending the date for ending of the price erosion. So I think all the products are like that, but it's only in a supply demand when there is any supply constraint, then the prices are forming up, or otherwise the pricing pressure is there. But I don't want to be too pessimistic here. One day the prices have to come back to the normal. So or otherwise, how many companies can sustain? And then even the large companies cannot bear that kind of a no profit or the loss-making scenarios. I think it should come sooner than later, the price forming up. At least first, the fall has to stop. Then the forming up will take place. So I am personally hopeful the fall will stop maybe in the next coming quarters.
Okay. Right, sir. We'll pause the moderated panel discussion and take up the questions from the participants. Over to you, Mac.
Thank you. D. Naveen Kumar will be taking over the Q&A session. Dear participants, we would now begin our Q&A session, and you are requested to key in the queries in your panel.
Yeah. So actually, there are a few questions are there in this from the participants. So this question is, it is mentioned that my question is for Mr. Ravi Kumar, sir. How is the market scenario in LMIC, that is emerging markets in terms of pricing and demand? If you can give some sense.
LMIC market, if you're talking specific to any therapy, if it is general, the pricing again, it's also following the trend because some of the inventory held up by the manufacturer, everyone wants to liquidate their stock. So there is some small pricing pressure is there, of course. And compared to the developed market like US, the pricing is not that bad. That price erosion is not that bad. You can't compare developed market prices with LMIC prices.
And one more question which is there is again to Ravi Kumar sir only, which they have mentioned specifically. So here they have mentioned is that the crude oil prices are consistently increasing, and solvents also being linked to that of the crude oil prices. How much actually the solvent price contributes to the COGS, and what kind of impact it will be having on the EBITDA margins?
It all depends on the product to product. I think anywhere between 10 to 20% is the contribution of the solvent prices. But he or she is right. The solvent prices shoot up, but last few months actually there is a softening of the prices.
And one last question from the participants. This is to Dhawan sir. The participant would like to understand that going forward, how the R&D scenario or R&D expenditure is that you're expecting for next 2 to 3 years from the formulation companies.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, R&D is really important, and so if we have to look at it from a overall perspective, and as a matter of capital allocation. So this is more from the capital allocation that. So if you see, there are 3 broad buckets, as I mentioned. One is the generic. So where the investments are more on distribution piece, focusing more on the accessibility and affordability aspect. So that's one piece. The second piece is the branded generic, where the focus is quality, accessibility, and the affordability part. So combination of 3. Then the third bucket is where it's the patented R&D, and the focus is on the unmet demand, so to say. And so we have seen the companies are investing 6 to 9% of their turnover in the R&D. So that trend is expected to continue. But given that most of the companies, if you look at from the industry standpoint, from the presentation, so 30 to 35% of the turnover is coming from US. And if you look at the capital allocation, that is 50 to 65% goes towards that operation. So R&D, as the companies, they have to move up the value chain. There is no other alternative but to invest in R&D. So going forward, definitely the R&D spend is definitely going to go up. And if you compare the expenditure of India R&D as compared to the developed countries, so we have a miles to go. So currently, on an overall at a country level, I think the R&D expenditure is somewhere between 3 to 4%, whereas US or the other developed countries, they are spending more than close to around 15 to 20% on the R&D. So to sum it up, yes, the R&D is critical function, and the times to come, it's certainly going to go up. So, yeah.
I think what you said actually syncs with what actually one slide we made in the presentation, growing up the value chain and increasing in terms of R&D part and all. And yes, sir. Right. So thank you, sir. Thank you for both of your inputs.
Thank you.
Meg would like to take over.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again to all our guest speakers, VV Ravi, Kumar, and Ashutosh Dhawan, for their insightful views. It was a privilege to host you. And thank you to all the participants for taking their time out and being a part of this CareEdge webinar. For any further queries, feedback, or suggestion, please write to us at corpcom@careedge.in. Goodbye for now. I request the tech team to log off.